The minute I stepped into that dimly lit cocktail bar downtown, I knew I was playing with fire. There he was, Alex, a complete stranger with a charm that hit me like a freight train. It was that kind of dangerous attraction I hadn't felt in years, not since the early days with Mike. It was reckless, I know, but the thrill, it was intoxicating. Alex and we started meeting in secret, sneaking off to a secluded hotel room on the outskirts of the city. Every text, every stolen moment felt like a jolt of electricity. I was alive, buzzing with excitement and dread all mixed into one. It was madness, but I couldn't resist the pull. Then came that fateful afternoon when I got home, trying to sneak in like a teenager past curfew. But Mike was there, waiting. The look on his face wasn't anger, it was concern. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. I could see it in his eyes, he knew something was off. I mumbled something about work, a new project, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. Guilt was eating me alive, but the thrill of the affair. It was like a drug. I kept lying to Mike, telling him I was working late, drowning in deadlines. But the truth? I was drowning in lies. One evening, Mike's suspicions got the better of him. He followed me, and there, through the window of that downtown restaurant, he saw us, me and Alex, laughing, touching, lost in our secret world. The evidence was mounting. Mike started collecting it like a detective. Photos of us together, credit card statements for dinners I never mentioned, hotel receipts. The betrayal written in black and white. When Mike confronted me, his voice was shaking. I'd never seen him like that, hurt, betrayed, yet there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He suggested counseling, a chance to wipe the slate clean. Part of me wanted to grab onto that lifeline, to get back to the safety of what we had. But the other part, the part that had tasted the thrill of the affair, wasn't ready to let go. Our living room became a courtroom that night, evidence laid out, accusations flying. Mike's plea for counseling sounded like a lifeline, but I was already drowning. The truth? I was torn between two worlds, and neither felt like mine anymore. The promise I made to end things with Alex weighed on me like a lead vest, but who was I kidding? My heart had a compass that pointed straight to him, no matter how much my brain tried to navigate away. The thrill, the passion, it was all too intoxicating. So, I did what any hard-over-head person would do. I met him again, telling myself it was just to say goodbye. But we all know how those goodbyes go, don't we? Meanwhile, Mike, bless his heart, had been holding onto a thread of hope that we could patch things up. But that thread snapped the moment a mutual friend spotted me and Alex at a local concert, our laughter mingling with the music in a way that couldn't be mistaken for anything but intimate. Mike's discovery was a silent explosion, setting off a series of actions that were as cold as they were calculated. The first blow came without warning. I tried to buy coffee one morning, only to have my card declined. Confused, I called the bank, only to find out our accounts were drained and the cards cancelled. This must be some mistake, I stammered, but deep down, I knew. Mike had started his revenge. Oblivious to the financial desert Mike had left behind, I planned a weekend getaway with Alex. Just a few days, I thought, to figure things out. But when we returned, my key turned in the lock, yet the door wouldn't budge. That's when I saw them. My clothes, my shoes, my life, piled up outside the door like trash. And there, pinned to my suitcase, was the final nail in the coffin: divorce papers. Panic set in. My hands shook as I dialed Alex's number, desperate for some comfort, some plan. But all I got was the cold, indifferent tone of a disconnected line. I rushed to his apartment, but the place was empty, a ghost of the love nest it had been. Alex had vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the aftermath. With nowhere else to turn, I reached out to my friends, but the reception was frosty at best. How could you? Their eyes judged, their words sharp with betrayal. I had become an outcast, my actions unforgivable. Standing alone amidst the ruins of my life, I realized the cost of my choices. I had gambled everything on a fling and lost, not just my husband, but my security, my friends, my dignity. The cold reality of my situation hit me hard, leaving me stranded in a sea of consequences I was utterly unprepared to navigate. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw it splashed all over social media: Mike's new startup. It was like a punch to the gut. There he was, beaming, his story of betrayal turned into a triumphant tale of resilience and starting over. The irony wasn't lost on me. While his life was skyrocketing, mine was in freefall, tainted by whispers and judgmental stares. Finding a job turned into an impossible task. Every interview ended with that polite, yet final, "We'll be in touch," which, of course, they never were. Mike's story wasn't just a sensation. It was a wildfire, burning any bridge I hoped to cross back into my industry. My reputation was the kindling, and he was the one holding the match. I tried reaching out to Mike, foolishly thinking there might be a sliver of compassion left for the woman he once loved. But my calls, texts, even emails, vanished into the void, unanswered. It was clear. I was erased from his life, the door slammed shut and locked twice over. The realization hit hard when a former colleague, drunk at a bar, let slip that Mike had been poisoning the well, making sure my name was synonymous with betrayal. The industry I had dedicated my life to was now a fortress I couldn't enter, all doors bolted shut by the man I had betrayed. With no job and dwindling savings, I was forced to move. My new home was a cramped apartment in a part of the city even the cops hesitated to visit. The stark contrast to my previous life wasn't just shocking, it was a vivid reminder of how far I'd fallen. Then came the night that twisted the knife even further. I ran into Alex, the man I had risked everything for. The truth spilled out over cheap drinks at a dingy bar. Mike had hired him, a pawn in a cruel game of revenge designed to shatter my world. Alex, with guilt written all over his face, claimed ignorance of the full extent of Mike's plan. But what did it matter? The damage was done. Fueled by a mix of rage and desperation, I stormed to Mike's office the next day. I was going to confront him, make him see the wreckage he'd caused. But I barely made it past the lobby. Security was on me in seconds, escorting me out like I was some kind of criminal. Mike's final message delivered through their firm grip and stern looks. Standing on the sidewalk, watching the sun set on the gleaming glass facade of what used to be a shared dream, I felt the full weight of my choices. Mike had moved on, building an empire on the ruins of our life together, while I was left sifting through the ashes. The realization that I was truly alone, the architect of my own downfall, was a bitter pill to swallow. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small lives caught in its gears, and I was just another cautionary tale, a whisper of what not to become. Just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, life handed me a shovel and said, "Keep digging." There I was, scrubbing dishes and cleaning up spills in a dingy diner, a world away from the corporate boardrooms I was used to. But you know what? Amidst the grease stains and endless piles of dirty plates, I found something unexpected, a gritty kind of peace. It was the peace that comes from knowing you're fighting to survive on your own terms, no matter how humble the battlefield. But peace, it seems, was a luxury I couldn't afford for long. One gloomy Tuesday, as I traded my dignity for minimum wage, a process server walked into the diner, weaving through the maze of worn-out booths to hand me a stack of papers. Mike was suing me for embezzlement of all things. It was ludicrous, a fabricated charge designed to kick me while I was down. But the damage was instant. Whispers followed me as I moved between tables, the weight of false accusations bending me closer to the ground. The legal battle that ensued was like fighting a wildfire with a water pistol. My savings, already a laughable figure, evaporated like a morning mist under the scorching sun of attorney fees and court costs. And when the charges were finally dropped for lack of evidence, I was left not with a sense of victory, but a hollow emptiness. My reputation, the one thing I had left to salvage, was now just fragments of a life I barely recognized. In a desperate bid for redemption, I reached out to the media. I thought, maybe, just maybe, if people heard my side of the story, they'd see me as more than just the villain in Mike's wildly successful comeback narrative. But hope has a cruel way of twisting into despair. The story that aired was not the one I told. Instead, it painted me as a cautionary tale, a warning against infidelity and moral decay. My attempt to clear my name only served to bury it deeper in the court of public opinion. Then came the final blow, the one that knocked the wind out of whatever fight I had left. Mike's wedding. It was the event of the season, splashed across every social media platform and gossip column. Pictures of him and his new bride, a socialite known for her philanthropy and impeccable taste, flooded my feeds. They looked happy, radiant even. It was more than just a marriage, it was a declaration. Mike had moved on, and he had done so spectacularly. Sitting alone in my cramped apartment, I realized the full extent of my fall. Once part of a power couple, I was now the outcast, the pariah. Mike's life was a fairy tale, complete with a comeback story and a princess bride. Mine was a cautionary tale, a grim warning of how quickly the world you build can crumble beneath your feet. In that moment, I understood the cruel irony of it all. My fight for independence, for a fresh start, had led me here, to a place where I was more trapped by my past than ever before. The freedom I thought I'd found in my menial jobs, in my struggle for survival, was just an illusion. Mike's shadow loomed large over my life, a constant reminder of the cost of my choices. The chapter closed with me sitting in the dim light of my apartment, a world away from the glitz and glamour of Mike's new life. It was a stark contrast, a bitter reminder of the distance between the life I once had and the reality I now faced. Alone, disgraced, and fighting a battle I no longer believed I could win, I was a woman unmoored, adrift in a sea of my own making. Dragging my past behind me like a shadow, I moved to a new city, hoping for a clean slate. But my story had already gotten there before me, spreading through social media and news articles like a stain I couldn't wash out. Every job interview, every new acquaintance, it was there, lurking, a specter of my former life. Just as I started to find my footing, life threw me another curveball. I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Alex, the man I had risked everything for, had left me with more than just a broken heart and a tarnished reputation. He had left me with a life growing inside me, a constant reminder of our fleeting affair. The decision to give up my baby for adoption was the hardest I've ever had to make. Sitting in the sterile office of the adoption agency, signing the papers, I felt a piece of my soul tear away. I left the agency empty, a shell of the woman I once was, haunted by the what-ifs and could-have-beens. Months later, as if the universe hadn't done enough, I received a package. Inside was a flash drive, no note, no explanation. Curiosity overcame my apprehension, and I watched the content. It was me and Alex, in those stolen moments, a digital footprint of my betrayal. The pain, the guilt, it all came rushing back, overwhelming me like a tidal wave. The pressure, the constant reminders of my past mistakes, it was too much. I was on the edge, teetering on the brink of a breakdown. My world was a lonely place, filled with shadows and whispers, a prison of my own making. In my darkest hour, I found a flicker of light. A support group for women who had faced similar public shaming and humiliation. Walking into that first meeting, I was a bundle of nerves, but what I found was a lifeline. Here were women who understood, who had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but alive, resilient. Through the support group, I slowly started to find my footing again. Sharing my story, listening to theirs, I found a semblance of community, a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in months. It was here, in this circle of women, that I began to see a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption, not from others, but from myself. My journey, my fall from grace, began to attract the attention of a small group of activists fighting against the very thing that had torn my life apart, revenge tactics and public shaming. They saw in my story not just the tale of one woman's downfall, but a rallying cry against a culture quick to judge and slow to forgive. Together, we started to speak out, to share our stories not as cautionary tales, but as beacons of hope for others trapped in the cycle of shame and humiliation. It was a slow process, fraught with setbacks and heartbreak, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. A movement that sought not just to heal the wounds of the past but to change the narrative for the future. In this new city, with these women by my side, I began to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. The journey was far from over, the shadows of my past still clung to me, but now, I faced them not alone, but as part of a community that understood, that supported, that fought back. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and for now, that was enough. The moment I decided to take a stand against the revenge culture that had torn my life apart, I felt a spark of something I hadn't in a long time, purpose. With the support of my newfound community, I began to use my story not just as a cautionary tale, but as a battle cry against the vengeful narratives that thrive in the shadows of our society. I started speaking at events, writing articles, and participating in discussions, all aimed at shedding light on the destructive power of revenge. But for every step forward, it felt like the shadow of my past pulled me 2 steps back. No matter how much I tried to advocate for change, there were always those who saw me not as a victim of revenge culture but as a perpetrator of my own downfall. It was a bitter pill to swallow, the realization that some stains are too deep to wash out, some judgments too ingrained to overturn. Then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, I stumbled upon a secret forum. It was like peering into the heart of darkness. There, in black and white, were the detailed plans and gleeful celebrations of my misfortunes, all orchestrated by Mike. The shock of it was visceral, a physical blow that left me reeling. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that someone I once loved could harbor such malice, could delight in my suffering. Fueled by outrage and a desperate need for justice, I decided to take legal action against Mike for defamation and emotional distress. I knew it was a David versus Goliath battle, me against Mike's seemingly endless resources and influence, but I couldn't let it go. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been cornered into silence by the threat of public shame. The legal battle that ensued was nothing short of brutal. Every aspect of my life, every decision I had made, was dissected and debated in the court and across media platforms. It was a public spectacle, a feeding frenzy for a society all too eager to consume the downfall of a woman already beaten down by her mistakes. And then, the verdict, Mike's favor. The court cited insufficient evidence to prove defamation or intentional emotional distress. It was a crushing defeat, a public affirmation of my worst fears. The legal costs bankrupted me, leaving me financially and emotionally destitute. My fight for justice, for vindication, had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Sitting in the stark, unfurnished apartment that had become my sanctuary in my prison, I was forced to confront the harsh reality of my situation. The battle I had fought so fiercely, the cause I had championed so passionately, had come to naught. I was no hero, no martyr. I was just Ella, a woman who had made a series of devastating mistakes and paid the price tenfold. In the silence of my defeat, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about me and Mike, or even about revenge culture. It was about the unforgiving nature of our society, about the relentless pursuit of retribution over reconciliation, punishment over empathy. I had lost the battle, but the war, against hate, against the cycle of revenge, was far from over. Even in my lowest moment, I knew I couldn't give up. Not for me, but for those still fighting, still suffering in silence. The fight had to go on, even if I was no longer at the front lines. In a last-ditch effort to reclaim my narrative, I poured my heart and soul into writing a book. It was my side of the story, raw and unfiltered, a chronicle of love, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of redemption. I had hoped that by sharing my experiences, I might find solace, perhaps even help others who were navigating the treacherous waters of public shaming and personal downfall. But the publishing world was as unforgiving as the court of public opinion. Rejection after rejection landed in my inbox, each one a stark reminder of how far I had fallen. Undeterred, or perhaps just stubborn, I turned to self-publishing. It was a silent launch, no fanfare, no media buzz, just my story, floating in the digital ether, waiting to be discovered. To my surprise, the book slowly found its audience. It resonated with those who had felt the sting of betrayal, who had been dragged through the mud of public shaming. Word of mouth turned it into a cult classic, a beacon for the broken-hearted and the unfairly judged. My story, once a source of shame, had become a rallying cry for resilience and understanding. This unexpected turn of events led me down a new path, as a speaker and advocate against the culture of revenge and shaming. Standing on stages, sharing my tale, I found a semblance of peace. The scars of my past, both visible and invisible, remained, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were badges of survival, testament to the strength I had mustered in my darkest days. My journey even found its way into academic circles, becoming a subject of study in courses on media ethics and the psychology of revenge. It was an odd sort of immortality, my story dissected and analyzed by students and professors, a cautionary tale for the digital age. Yet, despite these small victories, I remained a figure of fascination and pity. My life, post-scandal, was still fodder for gossip blogs and whispered conversations. I had hoped to move beyond the affair, to redefine myself in the eyes of the world, but some stains are indelible, some narratives too entrenched to rewrite. Then, at a conference where I was invited to speak, I saw Mike. Our eyes met across the crowded room, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. His look was one of indifference, a clear signal that whatever we had once been to each other had evaporated into the ether of the past. There was no anger, no malice, just the cold, hard indifference of a stranger. That encounter haunted me as I returned to my modest apartment, a space filled with the echoes of a life I hardly recognized as my own. Alone, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The choices I had made, the roads I had traveled, had led me here, to a place of introspection and hard-won wisdom. I realized then that Mike's revenge, while devastating, had not been the end of my story. It had been a catalyst, forcing me to confront the darkest parts of myself and the society we live in. The cost had been high, irrevocably altering the course of my life, but in the rubble of my past, I had found fragments of a new beginning. As I sat there, looking out at the city lights, I understood that there was no going back to the life I once knew. The world had moved on, and so had I, in directions I never could have imagined. My story was one of many, a single thread in the tapestry of human experience, woven with the threads of joy, pain, loss, and redemption. In the silence of that night, I made peace with the fact that my journey was mine alone to continue. The future was uncertain, the path uncharted, but I was ready to face it, scars and all, armed with the lessons of my past and the faint, yet unextinguishable, light.